Here to cover all things crime, history, and politics, we are at the desk. I'm your host, Lauren Perry, and in today's episode, we will be talking about the Israel and Palestine conflict, Black History Month flashback on Barbara Jordan, and the Stanford prison experiment. Now, take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to ATD. First, it's time to send it over to the politics panel to discuss the Israel and Palestine conflict and a quick look into the FBI's case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Lauren. Tonight, 1 year and 4 months since the October 7th attack sparked another chapter in the Israel-Palestine conflict. We will now look into Donald Trump's foreign policy dealings in his first month on the job, including Syria's new government and plans for the Gaza Strip going forward. Also tonight, we will wrap up with the Department of Justice's droppings of the cases, the charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. So since Jordan is not here today, we're going to start with you, Ryan. Tell us a little bit about what you think so far of the foreign policy dealings with the current administration and Donald Trump.
Well, right now he wants to buy and own Gaza, which is pretty crazy to me. I mean, that's what he's been talking about today. Today he met with the Jordanian king to talk about it. The king actually seemed to be a little bit more on board than he was a couple days ago when it was first suggested. He agreed to let a couple thousand Palestinian children that are ill right now into Jordan to take care over them. But I think it's important to point out that the forced deportation or transfer of a civilian population is a violation of international law, along with a war crime. And that's what Trump wants to do right now.
I am very concerned because the whole long-term ownership stance that he's taken, I mean, to me, what else could that be but colonialism? Like, from the type of things that I've read from basically my background, like when I see somebody suggesting to own a country or own a piece of land that's not within their sovereign territory, that's colonialism, pot calling a kettle black. I think one thing to note about the term ethnic cleansing that's been thrown around is that it's not actually a codified war crime. It is under a larger umbrella of genocide. The exact definition from the UN Commission of Experts is rendering an area ethnically homogenous by using force and intimidation to remove persons of a given group from the area. So Trump has not necessarily said that he's going to send troops to, I guess, facilitate this transfer of land to the U.S. And obviously all of his cabinet members have said that there has been no insinuation that they're going to be sent troops. So that force and intimidation aspect is kind of lacking. But I think the fact that you can even suggest Palestinians and Gazans leaving their home permanently is very worrying to me, because you want to rebuild an area that has been torn apart by war. But who better to rebuild Gaza than Gazans, you know? So
it also has a lot of historic oversight to it.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, no matter how many bombs have been dropped on your home, like, that's going to be your home. And there's a religious, there's a cultural, there's a spiritual connection between a people and their home. So to suggest forcibly moving them without even asking, like, hey, what do you guys think? That's concerning to me. That has a lot of imperialist overtones that I really do not appreciate.
And Jackson, before you go, what I'm getting out of what you're saying is basically you're seeing it as similar to relocating Native Americans from American land.
That is exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, it's not necessarily like Christopher Columbus, where it's involving complete bloodshed on behalf of Donald Trump, but it's relocating people that have a lot of historic oversight over the land, and that's what frustrates a lot of people. Jackson, let's turn the page just a little bit here. Of course, we want your opinion on this, but Gulf of America Day, every February 9th going forward. What do you think?
Well, I think again, it's him pushing this nationalist agenda of America's better than Mexico, therefore America deserves to have the name. Now, does it hold any real importance as far as financial gain or any like real, physical importance? No, but again, it's more of a metaphorical thing of that America is the one kind of carrying the North American continent, therefore America deserves to have the body of water named after them. I don't think it's particularly important personally, but I guess it's something that'll be cool to see on Google Maps. Now, can I go back to the Israel-Palestine
You're more than welcome to,
Yes.
please. Yeah.
Yes. So there's multiple facets to this. First things first, it would take, I believe, around $19 billion to rebuild the damage on the Gaza Strip. I think about 2/3 of the buildings have been destroyed. It's basically completely flattened. The people go back. They're not going to have much to go back to. But like you said, there are religious ties, there are cultural ties. And I personally do think they should be able to go back. And Trump did promise the America First agenda. And if he invests all this money and all this time to the Gaza Strip, that would violate the America First agenda. So I would not personally support Trump going into this territory and doing that. And that is one thing that I was kind of worried about with this administration is how soft is he going to be with Netanyahu? How soft is he going to be with Israel? And how sympathetic is he going to be with that, with what's going on over there? And I think that he should probably just back out and think about this a little bit more and focus more on fixing stuff here at home and not worrying so much about what's going on with Israel and Palestine, personally.
No new wars. He said no new wars. It seems like we're seeing a little bit more manifest destiny.
I don't think this will start a war per se. Again, he has said he doesn't want to use troops. He wants it to be more of a peaceful removal.
War crimes.
Yes.
War
Yes.
crimes.
Yes. But I'm saying he doesn't want troops used. So I don't think there's necessarily violence being advocated here. However, it can lead to that. And that's what I'm worried about. Because we don't want our troops going over there. We also don't want more civilians being killed. There's already been 39,000, or if not more, Gazan civilians killed in the last year. So we need to prevent death. We need to prevent destruction. We need to prevent people being removed from their homes. And I think that Donald Trump should reconsider what he's doing right now, personally.
Now, Ryan, before you go on, I have a quick question for you. Obviously, you oppose what Donald Trump says. What would your solution be?
Well, originally I kind of had a two-state solution mindset, but given the situation, I just have a hard time believing that a two-state solution can really be possible. I feel like there's just too much animosity between the two groups. Like, I think the far right on Israel obviously do not want this war to end. They want to keep going after Hamas, and they might get a chance to do so if Hamas doesn't release all the hostages on Saturday like Trump wants. But point being is that a two-state solution was the best possible outcome, but I think given the current climate and the fragility of the ceasefire, that it's really not possible. Or if it was possible, it'd be extremely difficult.
What about rebuilding Gaza?
Rebuilding Gaza, I think that should be left up to Gazans. I mean, they're going to need aid, but I don't think clearing them out and turning Gaza into a new Dubai is going to help anybody.
I would agree with Ryan P. I think that obviously we have U.S. aid being frozen. So unless Donald Trump sees fit to unfreeze those funds and start directing funds to Gaza, but at the discretion of the Palestinians and making them be or putting them in charge of how those funds are used. Because like you said, making it a new Dubai and a tourist spot when you have so many people who've built their lives there, their ancestors have built their lives there is, I think, insensitive. I think regarding a two-state solution, again, very difficult. I think it starts with the United States recognizing Palestine as a sovereign nation because we still haven't done that to this day. I don't have the exact numbers, but there was a recent resolution passed where a lot of Western states like Spain and Norway and other states like that have recognized Palestine as a sovereign territory, as a sovereign nation. And I think that is the first step in the right direction because that will kind of pressure Israel to relinquish their occupation of the Gaza Strip. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I don't think Netanyahu would want to do that, but he's very unpopular. So whenever Israeli elections happen, I'm wondering if maybe we'll see Netanyahu ousted and maybe someone more moderate who has more
A takeover in the Likud.
Exactly. Somebody who's more open to the idea of recognizing Palestine as a sovereign nation, I think would probably be the best way, but I don't see that in the near future.
I'm sure you've also probably seen the polling in Israel with Netanyahu doing significantly less good compared to Jewish people in the United States polling with him a lot. In the United States, Netanyahu is a lot more popular with Jewish people than he actually is in Israel.
Yeah, they were out protesting over him the other night, or actually today, saying that he's not doing enough to bring those hostages home.
Other foreign policy opinions on the current situation with U.S. aid?
I mean, USA, the disillusion of that, or the disinvolvement of that, it's just kind of it's a little weird. I just know why they picked that to specifically target. I feel like U.S. aid is a program that I didn't know much about it, honestly, before the news came out. I'll be honest about that. But it really just seems like a program that was designed to help people. I don't know why, of all things that Elon Musk wants to destroy with, Department of Government Efficiency, why that was at the top of his list.
I think kind of going back to
Again,
what
it's
Jackson
America
said,
first
America
agenda.
first. That's what I was
It's
going to say.
no more investing in foreign policy, no more investing, not foreign policy, but foreign wars that don't directly involve the U.S. That's kind of what Trump campaigned on. That's what Americans voted for. That being said, for what my solution to the two-state solution would be, I would say just try to extinguish as much extremism on both sides as possible. Because right now you have Israelis and Palestinians who don't view the other sides as humans; they view them as almost like animals. I mean, it's truly horrific. So I think Trump needs to, be a little bit more careful with his words and just be a better ambassador to these nations and just kind of like try to extinguish the extreme sides of this. Because Netanyahu himself is sort of an extremist. We know this. He's engaged in what we would consider to be war crimes, and
I don't
Hamas.
I don't think he needs the sword of in his brand. I think he's
Yes.
pretty established as an extremist right winger.
Obviously, October 7th, what Hamas did was horrible.
Mhm.
It was one of the worst things we've seen in the last decade or so. So yeah, Trump needs to be a better figure for the United States to just kind of like extinguish that extreme element of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I don't think asking Trump to be more careful with his words is something that is
That's the
a
unfortunate truth.
reality.
He doesn't know what.
Going back to your question about the pausing of U.S. aid in general, as somebody who believes that foreign aid, especially in countries in the global south, always has some kind of strings attached to it, it does kind of pain me to see the pausing of it, because I know like back in Africa where I'm from, like it's really affected a lot of people. But I do think that this should give foreign states the opportunity to kind of step up. You have a lot of kleptocracies, you have a lot of places where the money is going somewhere, but it's not reaching the people. So even though I think it's too abrupt, and I think it definitely signals that Trump is trying to move away from America's legacy as kind of the beacon of democracy, as a country that gives to countries that are not in the same position as we are. I hope that countries in the global south can take this as a sign of like, okay, we can't be relying on the outside anymore. Like we really have to step up because people are dying, people are in severe poverty. I would like to see a negotiation worked out where USAID funding is only like slowly phased out and not just abruptly stopped, because that's not good for anybody.
Absolutely. Well, we have a little bit more to get to before we wrap up. Let's talk about Syria for a second. We do know Trump took some action in Syria in 2019. He is now back at the front stage. He's at the helm of the United States' operation, working with Syrians as this transition happens, Ryan.
I mean, I'm pretty sure he's at odds with, or Syria is starting to be at odds with him right now over his proposal to take over Gaza, just like a lot of the Arab states are. I mean, Egypt rejected it, Jordan rejected it. I really would not be surprised if tensions with us and other countries in the area only got worse as a result of Trump's plan.
Well, before you make a statement, I'd just like to say Trump actually posted to Truth Social not too long ago, the United States should have nothing to do with it, that being, of course, the situation in Syria. This is not our fight. Let's let it play out and let's not get involved.
Yeah, so I think that Trump says a lot of stuff, but doesn't always act on what he says. I think he loves to talk. He loves to talk. He loves the Truth Social. He loves to tweet, not tweet, X now. You know what I mean. But yes, he loves doing that. So I think that he won't get super involved in the transition of Syrian power. I think that with the Israel-Palestine, he'll be a little bit more involved because Israel is one of America's closest allies historically. So he kind of has to be a little more involved with that. But I don't think Trump is going to end up getting that involved in Syria because that's something that they can handle on their own, I believe. And I hope they do. But yeah, I don't think Trump is going to act on his words that much in this particular case.
And you know what? I think that's honestly, and I'm surprising myself by saying this, I think that's honestly the best course of action for America to stay out of this, because we've seen in the past that when the U.S. gets involved, especially in the Middle East, when it comes to transitions of power, that always comes back to bite us in the rear because of this opposition to Westernization, to Americanization from the masses. And political figures as well, that always turns into whoever the U.S. endorses in government when you have that transitional period. It's a Western puppet. Oh, they're America's puppet. They're all of these things. So I think letting the Syrian people figure it out on their own and kind of taking like a standby position is the best course of action in my opinion.
Any more foreign policy mentions before we get a little bit more domestic?
I mean, the Ukraine war is still going on strong. Trump said he would end it by the time he was in office. Didn't happen. It's still it kind of seems like Ukraine is kind of making or not Ukraine, Russia is kind of making the push. I mean, Ukraine is not losing as many soldiers, but Russia is making a lot of gains or making a lot of ground gains. Aside from that, I don't think Trump's going to do much to really stop Putin. I mean, he said the other day that Ukraine may be Russian someday.
He actually made a major trade today, bringing home a United States teacher who was in Russia. I don't know.
Saw that.
It's not really in the popular media yet. It's going to make its way out there. But actually, Donald Trump described having a very good conversation with the Russians making the trade.
Yes, he has spoken to Zelensky and Putin. Obviously, the conflict has killed a lot of people in the last couple of years. I think the war is definitely slowing down a bit from where it was. But yeah, he is not
out of the media.
Well, yes, but I'm saying I do think the war slowed down a little bit just because Ukraine was putting up a good fight due to the foreign aid, but at the same time, the world as a whole are not very happy with Zelensky right now because of how much money he's absorbed, and they don't view this as a war with any point. Basically, like I don't know if the whole world views Ukraine's sovereignty as that important. I personally think that Ukraine's sovereignty is, I would say, mildly important compared to some other nations. Obviously, again, America voted for the America First agenda, and they don't want this much money invested into Ukraine fighting the war against Russia, even if they don't like Putin necessarily. So that's where the conflict comes in. Like, do we want to spend this much, billions and billions of dollars going to Ukraine to defend whatever provinces that they want to protect, or do we invest money here trying to help things on the domestic side?
I would push back on your statement about Ukraine's sovereignty being only mildly important. I think that preserving any country's sovereignty should be honestly at the top of international laws,
especially a democratic country.
They're
not a democratic country anymore. It's the thing. Zelensky has not held an election. He's staying in office and he's keeping himself using this war.
It's a time of war. You wouldn't say that about FDR.
I don't honor that.
Do you want to know why?
I'm sure. Go for it. Tell me why.
There's a little something called martial law,
and I don't like that. And I don't like that.
But where was I going with this? Yes. So I think that preserving a country's sovereignty, no matter what, should be at the top of the agenda of the international community, because I think we are way past the point where we can excuse or even turn a blind eye when a country's sovereignty is threatened. I feel like everybody, Winston Churchill said it, that every nation has the right to govern itself. So the fact that we can even entertain conversations about maybe putting questions of Ukraine's ability to govern itself to the side is very concerning to me. It's a very concerning statement that you just made, Jackson.
I will say, well, while I might agree more with Yaya, I agree with something that J.D. Vance said, was that it's likely if we want to stop all the bloodshed and stop this war and, basically have the most humane outcome possible, it's very possible Ukraine's going to have to surrender some land in this. I would agree with that.
And that's my whole point here is that my main goal here, not my main goal,
Trump's
main goal is to preserve life. That is the main thing. That's Israel-Palestine goal and this goal. Preserve life and end this war, because some provinces being given up is not a good look. You don't want to give Putin anything. You don't want to give Putin anything ideally, but you also don't want to have thousands of more men on his side and the Ukrainian side die, because right now Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers don't want to fight this war. They're being forced to fight. They don't want to be out there in these trenches dying. So I think that the first thing to do is just stop the fighting initially, and then from there find some land agreements.
I think Trump's
I don't know if Putin will come to the table.
I think Trump's ideal outcome should be for Ukraine to not lose any territory, because if it does, at the end of the day, that's going to reflect badly not only on Zelensky, but also on Trump, who has said many times that he would have never let this war happen, that he's not going to let Putin get away with as much as Biden let him get away with. So if Putin ends up gaining more territory from Ukraine, people are going to look to Trump. People look back home, and the Ukrainians that have come here are going to look to Trump, and they're going to be like, well, I thought you said that this was not going to happen.
I mean, I don't think Trump is personally going to really stop Putin. I mean, they're kind of buddy-buddy.
I don't know if Putin's going to come to the table. That's the whole situation. Everyone's assuming Putin's
Trump has claimed he's made a phone call to Putin, but you come to the table, we don't know that yet.
I'm sure. I'm sure he can make phone calls all day. I mean,
but he has spoken with Trump and spoken about possibly coming to a ceasefire. But
you could call anyone you want.
To the table is different.
Right. Yeah, I can make a phone call across the world. That doesn't mean that Putin's going to sit down and at the table and negotiate with Ukraine.
That's going to be a work in progress. But yes, there is a conversation happening.
Well, we have to move on because unfortunately our producers are not very happy with our timing. So let's get a little bit more domestic before we wrap up. We have a couple minutes. Eric Adams, the Trump-led Department of Justice, has announced that he suggests that the case against Eric Adams just be dropped entirely. Now, Eric Adams is not pardoned. Eric Adams' charges should be thrown away, according to Donald Trump. What do you think of that?
I think it's the right move. I think it was kind of strange that he was one of the few anti-Biden Democrats, and all of a sudden these charges got pressed on him towards the end of last year. And I think that, I didn't see any solid evidence of what he did. And I look, I have mixed feelings about Eric Adams as a politician, as a mayor, and anything else.
Mhm.
But I do think that there was some political motivation behind those charges, and I do think dropping them was the right move for the DOJ.
I should announce New York City. Actually, Eric Adams just beat his own record of the most amount of consecutive days without a violent crime in New York City. So Eric Adams is producing results again. But your opinion?
Yeah.
I believe it was 5 consecutive days of no violent crime in New York City. But just
Oh,
wanted to
I
point
was
that
hoping
out.
for something like 25 or something like
No.
that. But what can
Unfortunately,
what
it's
more can
hard
we
when you're
ask
governing
for?
7 million people in a dense city.
Yeah. I think honestly, I don't know. Like Jackson said, I didn't see anything that was compelling to me.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about charges getting dropped. Maybe like continue a little bit, like probe a little bit more. The idea of charges getting dropped just like that kind of is off-putting to me. I feel like, especially if it's a government official, I feel like we should definitely come down harder on government officials. But I honestly don't think it even affected Eric Adams' career that much. He was already
I don't
pretty
think he's running for
unpopular.
re-election.
So I don't think, honestly, in the long run, I don't think these charges were really going to be doing anything negatively or positively for him. So I think it comes out to like net zero results, in my opinion.
The charges kind of did their job. 50% of New Yorkers now say they won't vote for him. At least 50, pardon me.
I mean, the situation was a little weird. He spent a couple months trying to cozy up to Trump, look good in front of him, be where he's have meetings with him at Mar-a-Lago or whatever. I don't think it's really surprising that the Justice Department is throwing or looking to throw away his case.
Well, fortunately, that is all the time that we have tonight here on the Politics Panel. Lauren, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. Stay tuned for a Black History Month flashback on Barbara Jordan. Over to you, Gabrielle.
Tonight, we honor the remarkable life and legacy of Barbara Jordan, a pioneering American lawyer, educator, and politician. Join me as we explore her journey from humble beginnings to becoming a trailblazer in American politics. Barbara Jordan was born on February 21, 1936, in Houston, Texas. Growing up in a segregated neighborhood, she was one of the youngest of 3 daughters in a close-knit family. Her parents, Benjamin Jordan, a Baptist minister, and Arlene Jordan, a domestic worker, installed in her the values of education, hard work, and faith. These principles would guide her throughout her life. Barbara's academic journey began at Texas Southern University, where she excelled as a member of the debate team. Her exceptional skills in oratory and argumentation earned her national recognition and laid the foundation for her future career in law and politics. After graduating magna cum laude in 1956, she pursued a law degree at Boston University School of Law, one of the few African American women in her class. Upon completing her law degree in 1959, Barbara returned to Houston and began practicing law. Her passion for civil rights and justice led her to enter the political arena. In 1966, she made history by becoming the first African American elected to the Texas Senate since the Reconstruction. Her election marked a significant milestone in the fight for racial equality and representation in government. During her time in Texas Senate, Barbara Jordan quickly gained a reputation as a formidable legislator. She was known for her eloquence, intelligence, and unwavering commitment in civil rights. In 1972, she achieved another historic milestone by becoming the first African American woman to serve as president pro tempore of the Texas Senate. On June 10, 1972, she served as acting governor of Texas for one day, making her the first African American woman to hold the position of governor in any state. Barbara Jordan's influence extended beyond the state of Texas. In 1972, she was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Texas' 18th congressional district. As a congresswoman, she continued to champion civil rights, social justice, and equality. Her powerful and eloquent speeches during the Watergate hearing in 1974 captured the nation's attention and solidified her reputation as a leader of integrity and principle. Throughout her career, Barbara Jordan received numerous accolades and honors for her contributions to public service and civil rights. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1994, one of the nation's highest civilian honors in recognition of her lifelong dedication to justice and equality. Barbara Jordan's legacy is one of courage, perseverance, and leadership. She broke barriers and paved the way for future generations of African American women in politics. Her life serves as an enduring inspiration, reminding us of the power of determination and the impact of a single voice in the pursuit of justice. As we celebrate Black History Month, let us remember and honor the remarkable achievements of Barbara Jordan, a true trailblazer and beacon of hope for all who strive for a more just and equitable society.
We are once again back at the desk. It's time to send it over to the crime panel to discuss the Stanford prison experiment. Over to you, Sophia.
Thanks, Lauren. Tonight we are going to be discussing the infamous Stanford prison experiment. Conducted in the summer of 1971, the experiment was developed by Philip Zimbardo and studied 24 male college students. Mr. Zimbardo created a fake prison in the basement of the Stanford building and assigned half of the students as prisoners and the other half as guards. Although the experiment was originally supposed to last for 2 weeks, it was stopped after 6 days due to the mental and physical distress the students faced. Tonight we'll analyze the experiment at a deeper level and discuss important aspects such as society's reaction and its flaws. So Savannah, can you give us a little bit of a general overview of the case?
Right. So like you were saying, this was a very, very controversial psychological experiment conducted in August of 1971 at Stanford University. It was supposed to be a 2-week simulation of a prison environment, and it was completely immersive. So the subjects slept there and really completely acted like it was real. It was meant to examine the effects of situational variables on participants and their reactions and behaviors. So this was all done by college students. There was an ad put out, they got $15 an hour, and there was a coin toss to determine who would be a prisoner and who would be a guard. And what ended up happening is it got so intense, and the prison runners ended up abusing and just manipulating these poor prisoners to the point of where it felt too real, and they had to cancel it after just 6 days of it running. People really thought this was interesting because they claimed the original ad drew people in who were already predisposed to this type of environment, who were predisposed to wanting power. But other people claim that this wasn't the case because the coin flip was done at random.
See, you might be able to divulge a little bit more about just the psychological impacts and just what really happened inside there. I mean, if you honestly beat me to it, if you want to go for it.
Yeah, so essentially I feel like...
Sorry, everyone in the control room. Evan, welcome, by the way.
Welcome.
Glad to be here. Basically, so I feel like I found a lot of different flaws that were presented throughout the whole 6 days of the experiment. I feel like the first flaw that you kind of touched on a little bit, but it was supposed to be 2 weeks and it ended up being 6, which is when you're preparing
6
for...
days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, not 6 weeks. 6 days. 6 days. Oh, that would be insane. I can't imagine that.
I don't know if they all would have made it out of there alive.
No, literally.
Definitely not.
But even 6 days, took a mental toll on these people, and kind of how you mentioned the role of power. So one of the main flaws was there was a lot of researcher bias, and since Zimbardo was actually a part of the study himself, he was basically the warden, the one kind of calling all the shots. He was kind of playing into this role of power with a lot of, psychological and abusive demands, and he kind of knew what he was doing, but since he was heavily involved with the experiment, he was actively encouraging this aggressive behavior. And kind of, if you're the researcher, you're the one studying, kind of doing the research, you should, be doing that from afar, in my opinion, at least, or however the setup was, he should have been an observer, not a part of it, not the one in on the action. And that just was a little bit biased, I feel like, and it wasn't the best representation of what would have happened. Because like you said, there was a lot of people who already came from a role of power in some shape or form. So if they were prison guard, then that kind of got to their head, and there wasn't any physical abuse. He wouldn't allow that, but he would still be pretty demanding, which is also another flaw. He would, basically lead these prison guards to have over-the-top, exaggerated behaviors. And I feel like, if you have your researcher and the guy in the room with you, you're most likely, that's not really genuine reactions. Because if I were in that situation, I'm a college kid, my frontal lobe isn't developed yet. I would totally let that power go to my head and do whatever is told of me.
I want to add to what you're saying. I think it's interesting how they were all the people involved in this were white males. There was no sort of diversity in this experiment at all. And I also think it's interesting that the guards were instructed to wear sunglasses so you couldn't make eye contact with them to really dehumanize it.
It was almost like a making of unison too within the guards. It was that they're not different guards. They're all one person in different bodies, was the whole idea of the sunglasses. And they were sent to go shopping before to get matching gear. The whole thing was just kind of like, it wasn't just the whole idea of you're a prisoner. It was that you're a part of something bigger than yourself. And that's what confused a lot of people. And that's what had a lot of prisoners a little scared.
I also, the sunglasses promoted the power of anonymity that the prisoners didn't get. And something that I read up on about Zimbardo is, now in retrospect, he calls it more of a demonstration than an experiment, which...
Or a simulation.
Yeah. I feel like you were just, number one, discrediting all of these people who had no idea what they were getting themselves into. And now you're saying, oh, it was more of a demonstration. You were guiding these guards to what you were expecting. And then you get surprised when all of these prisoners are inflicted with trauma and they're sobbing and they're ending everything early. After 6 days, there was a sociologist who went in and interviewed all of the prisoners, and they were telling her just all the things that happened. They had gotten into their heads that they were not normal college kids. They became prisoners. And that's when she went to Zimbardo and immediately was like, you have to call this off. This is a human rights violation.
Well,
and that brings in Jesse Fletcher,
Ryan.
too. That's
Oh,
a little
yeah.
Go ahead
So,
first,
no,
please.
go ahead.
Are you sure? All right.
Yeah.
So speaking of what you were saying, bouncing off of that, Jesse Fletcher was not necessarily an employee of the university. He was friendly with Philip Zimbardo, the guy who ran the experiment. And Jesse Fletcher was actually in prison himself, went through the parole board and all that. He helped Philip Zimbardo and was essentially the prison warden. And the problem with that whole thing was that he was basically using this and was feeling this way of getting back at the previous life that he had. He unfortunately well, I guess I shouldn't say unfortunately, but he walked out of the experiment early and said that he was very regretful of how he behaved.
Absolutely. And the researchers witnessed the subjects just completely losing control, whether you were a guard or whether you were a prisoner.
Right. And I think it's interesting that by day 2, prisoners had actually already staged a rebellion. That's how intense it was by day 2. And that caused the guards to work out a system of reward and punishment, which I think carried through to the next 6 days.
Yeah, because they had a private, almost privileged cell for the prisoners who were acting well versus all of the other ones. There was 9 of them, keep in mind.
And then they had the hole, which was worse than solitary.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a closet in the basement in Stanford. But the people who were not in the privileged cell, they weren't allowed to go to the bathroom at night, and they were given a bucket. And then, the guards don't want to take the bucket out. They're like, oh, you know what? This is part of their punishment. Punishment for what? For what crimes did they commit? You are being fed and you are being told to do these things. Just don't be physically violent. Everything else, though, you can restrict food. You can make their life as awful as possible. And it's okay because it's an experiment. But it's not an experiment. It's a demonstration. That's where I feel the psychology coming in of, was this an experiment like we're usually seeing? Or was this you just acting out something? Because Zimbardo really got into the superintendent role. And there was another researcher acting as warden, and
Jesse Fletcher.
Yeah, at the end of it, they're look back and they're like, okay, I think I was going a little too hard. You shouldn't be thinking that if you are a professor. That is what you're here to do. You should not be getting this involved in one of your research.
A very good point that was made was, at the end of the day, Zimbardo did not find an independent variable in his experiment.
And it almost reminds me of Lord of the Flies. I feel like he was going into this expecting to see, are people born evil? Are people born good? Is it something you just learn? When we've kind of seen a lot of examples in the past before, like I mentioned, Lord of the Flies, where if you are left to your own, people in social situations will take upon where they're at. If they are forced into being a leader, they will take that. But if they're being forced to take things out on other people below them, they will do that because they are being told. Is that really what we're learning, the evil versus the good? Or is it just listening to the person above you and not wanting to make them mad?
Yeah, another interesting aspect of this case that I found when I was researching was that Zimbardo allowed the parents to visit the students
around
Yeah.
like midway through the 6 days. And in his case notes, he explained how he manipulated the situation to make sure that the parents didn't see the horrible environment that the boys were living in. He wrote that they shaved, washed, and groomed the prisoners, cleaned their cells, fed them dinner, played music. And this shows how Zimbardo knew what he was doing was wrong, because if he thought what he was doing was right, he wouldn't have attempted to hide it.
Yeah.
And when one of the parents expressed concern, he twisted the situation and blamed the students, suggesting like that they weren't tough enough or strong enough. And like instances like that show that Zimbardo was not only manipulating the students, but manipulating the parents as well.
And it's a shame that he's still on this horse of, well, I didn't really do anything wrong. We are, in retrospect, now see all of the things wrong that happened in this. And especially the psychology community has to almost apologize for things like this happening, because it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, especially as a civilian hearing something about this. And you're like, oh, wow. I mean, you guys are the same age demographic of the men in this. You would go into this thinking, hey, $15 a day for 2 weeks, that's great. And then coming out of it, you don't want to show your face. And you are left permanently traumatized for an experiment about good versus evil. I mean, he talks about the Lucifer effect.
You didn't even get into John Wayne. Do you know about John Wayne?
What's the T?
John Wayne was the tallest, and I guess you could say the manliest guard. He wasn't directly told that he was in control, but he took control. He saw the opportunity. You know exactly what I'm talking
I know who
about.
you're talking about now. He's very vocal, which is ironic, because you were seen as the mean guard and the bad guy, but you're so vocal about how you were a guard. But the prisoners, you don't see them coming out and talking about it, because it was also very different for the guards. The guards were working in shifts. The guards were allowed to go home. The prisoners, you were a prisoner at all times until you mentally broke.
Right. And they even had to wear chains on their ankles, if I'm correct.
Yeah. They weren't even allowed to wear underwear. They had to wear pantyhose over their head.
And they had to wear a gown.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it
then
was a
day
gown.
2, they're like, no, this is not how I want to be doing this experiment, I feel. But then having just the person conducting it against you and skewing all of this research happening, I can understand why they stood up and why they had a revolution on only the second day. But what I want to talk a little bit more about is, how did this affect the prison system? Because we're talking about a prison. Is any of this actually in practice nowadays?
I don't think it was reminiscent of a prison system at all, if you want me to be honest with you. The whole idea of the dresses, the sunglasses, the basement of Jordan Hall, just the whole thing just really didn't connect to a prison like Zimbardo imagined it would. It really wasn't a simulation of the prison, because even though they did technically arrest all of these so-called prisoners and reenacted the whole thing, they used the Stanford Police Department for help on that one. The prisoners knew what they were getting to, and there was quite a few bad actors that wanted to cause havoc, wreak havoc to begin with. In Zimbardo's defense, even though he's not really worth defending, there were a lot of people that walked in there and said, "I want to destroy this experiment before it even starts."
But sorry, go on.
Oh, well, I was going to say, it definitely changed how we conduct experiments today. There's so many rules in place now and laws in defense of people who take part in these, just to prevent stuff like this from happening.
I don't know if any of you guys have watched. I was supposed to talk about it in popular culture. We're not going to have the time for that, but I suggest you watch the 2015 Stanford and Prison Experiment movie.
Yes.
It was, I don't want to say it was a perfect reenaction. There were a few inaccuracies and they missed a lot. It didn't show the entire brutality, but it showed how brutal it really was.
It's a good view for somebody who doesn't know the full case.
Very good.
To be able to get a grasp
Definitely.
on it.
Evan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was gonna say it was just kind of crazy to me that there was something that we didn't really mention. Kind of alluded to it, but they were stripped naked, hooded, chained, kind of going to that like psychological aspect you're talking about. But and kind of what you were mentioning with people kind of going in knowing they were gonna wreak havoc and cause malice behavior. But that would explain why they were traumatized. But again, the nervous breakdowns on day 2 through 6, like no wonder it had to end early. And it was just kind of crazy. A lot that was kind of kept under wraps, or at least they tried to kind of cover their tracks. But at the same time, years later, it's a demonstration.
Yeah, it's almost a mockery of psychology
And
itself.
it's talked about so much that they actually teach it in high schools. We had a lesson
Yes.
on it.
It's in all
It's
It's in all these textbooks.
Yeah, and I mean, at least we're learning from it now, but we're learning the wrong thing. I think we really are.
Well, it has been debunked multiple times, but the
Mhm.
severity of how it's been debunked, they haven't necessarily broken down everything to a T,
Yeah.
which is number one that I want to say, and number two, which I also want to highlight as well too, is Zimbardo kept telling the story past what happened and kept embellishing certain parts
Yeah.
of it,
Right.
and that's how a lot of people remember it more than how it actually happened. Even though I don't want to say there's complete video evidence of every step taken in that room, but there's video evidence of just about the severity of every single issue.
You can hear the audio of it. It's,
Mhm.
it's haunting.
Mhm.
Just hearing these prisoners who they're not even prisoners. They're just regular people.
They're
like us.
They're 24 college students that were told for 2 weeks are going to be a part of my simulation. I'm going to tell you it's an experiment,
Yeah.
and just good luck.
Yeah,
there was no
the
direction
point
for
for
is
his
it.
they're
own
gonna determine what
entertainment.
your
The
mental
guards-
health is
The
after.
guards were given no training or nothing. They basically just said, "You're in charge. Figure it out." And then John Wayne, who rushed to fraternity that spring, said, "You know what? Let me treat it like that." And that's just where it all got out of hand.
It is a lot. Unfortunately, that is all of the time we have thought tonight to discuss this interesting case. Thanks for tuning into the Crime Panel, and we'll see you next week. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Sophia. Sadly, that is all the time we have for today. In the meantime, stay updated with ATD on all socials at PSU at the desk. And let us know what you want to see us cover next. I'm Lauren Perry, and we will see you back at the desk next week. Good job, guys.